Today, we're diving into the really complex case of a Chinese scholar, a physicist, who is sentenced to prison. And the crime? Well, it wasn't for something he built or even something he wrote himself. It was for what he was doing on Twitter. Okay, so let's get right to the heart of this thing. This is the central puzzle of the whole case, right here. You've got this massive disconnect. On one side, the official accusation is incredibly serious, causing serious public disorder. But then you look at the reality of it. He was retweeting stuff to an account with fewer than 100 followers. So how on earth does a tiny online footprint lead to such a gigantic charge? Let's unpack that. The person at the center of all this is Dr. Chen Zhengyuan. He's a physicist. And in a really wild twist, the prosecution didn't just ignore his high level of education, they actually used it against him in court. This quote, which he wrote from prison, just perfectly captures his shock at the whole situation. So, to really get to the bottom of this, here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the who and the what, the scholar and the crime. Then we'll lay out the case against him. And after that, we're going to dive into his defense piece by piece before we step back and look at what this whole thing really means.
All right, first up, who is Dr. Chen Zhengyuan, and what exactly was he accused of doing? Let's get the core facts straight.
So, here's the rundown. It starts with a highly trained scientist, right? A guy with a PhD in a pretty complex field. His action? He retweeted some posts online. That's it. This leads to the charge of picking quarrels and provoking trouble, a law in China that's so notoriously vague, critics call it a pocket crime, because you can just pull it out of your pocket to fit almost any situation. And the result of all this? A prison sentence of 1 year and 8 months.
Okay, so we've seen the charge. Now, to be fair, let's take a look at how the prosecution actually built their case. What was the official argument that landed him in prison?
The state's case basically rested on 3 main pillars. First, the act. They claimed he spread false information. Second, the consequence. They said this act caused serious public disorder. And third, and this is the real kicker, the intent. They argued that because he was so highly educated, he must have known what he was doing. So now we're going to take apart each of these pillars, one by one, using Dr. Chen's own defense.
So first, Dr. Chen's defense went straight for the most critical part of the whole accusation, this claim that his retweets caused any disorder at all. And this is where he brought his unique expertise right into the courtroom.
This is where Dr. Chen basically turned the courtroom into a physics class, but in the coolest way. He argued from his own field. He said, social networks are what we call complex systems. They're built to be robust. As just one single insignificant node in that massive network, his retweets were just a microscopic disturbance. They were, scientifically speaking, incapable of causing the giant avalanche effect the prosecution was talking about. And he didn't just stick to the scientific jargon. He used this powerful analogy to make his point absolutely crystal clear. He said blaming his retweets for public disorder was like blaming his breathing for global warming. It was just a brilliant way to show how completely absurd the scale of the accusation was.
And hey, this wasn't just some abstract theory, right? After he was released, he actually got to look at the data. And what did he find? His Twitter account had fewer than 100 followers, and it turns out most of them were just inactive zombie accounts.
So what about the engagement on the specific posts that got him in trouble? Get this, it was practically zero. After he got out, he saw the posts were still online, and they had gathered no new attention, no discussion, nothing. The data was just undeniable. His posts caused zero interaction, which makes the claim of serious public disorder seem factually impossible.
All right, so with the whole disorder claim pretty much dismantled, Dr. Chen moved on to the next part. He challenged the very idea that what he retweeted could even be legally called false information in the first place. He broke down the posts themselves, one by one. First, you had art, like a cartoon. How can a piece of art be false? Then there were expressions of emotion, like a picture from a vigil. That's a feeling, not a fact you can verify. He also shared opinions and theories, which are meant for academic debate, not a true-false test. And for the few posts that were factual descriptions, his point was simple. They had never been officially proven false, and it's not a citizen's job to fact-check the entire internet.
So finally, his defense went after that third pillar, the accusation that he knew the information was false and that he shared it anyway. And this is where his argument got really philosophical.
Here, Dr. Chen's defense turned inward to the way his own mind works.
As a scholar, he argued, his entire way of thinking is built on skepticism. He questions everything. So this legal idea of knowing something with absolute certainty, he said that was completely inconsistent with his own cognitive structure. He forwarded things for academic inquiry, not because he knew they were true.
And then he did something really clever. He took the prosecution's own argument and just flipped it completely on its head. Remember, they said that because he's highly educated, he should have known better. Well, Dr. Chen said it was precisely because of his education that he knew his tiny actions were scientifically harmless. In his view, his education was proof that he lacked any criminal intent.
So when you take a step back and look at the whole thing, you realize this case wasn't just about a few tweets. It was a clash between two fundamentally different ways of seeing the world and the role of information in it.
On one side, you have the state's framework. Speech is a potential threat. Context doesn't really matter, meaning is fixed, and if it's deemed dangerous, it's a crime. But on the other side, you've got the scholar's framework. Speech is a tool for inquiry and learning. Here, context is everything, and meaning is always open for interpretation and debate.
So, what was the final outcome? Well, despite this incredibly detailed defense, arguing from science, from law, and from philosophy, the verdict was upheld. His appeal was just rejected without even a hearing. And that leaves us with this stark, unresolved contradiction. A legal system that insisted on his guilt versus a logical defense that argued the crime he was accused of was, by its very definition, impossible.
And so, we're left with a very modern twist on that old philosophical riddle about the tree in the forest. It really forces us to ask some fundamental questions. In our super-connected world, what is the line between an action and an impact? When does a digital whisper become a public roar? This case, well, it doesn't offer any easy answers.